One of the telltale signs that a franchise is struggling is when you see them riding the quarterback carousel. For those who don't know, when a team is on the quarterback carousel, they are constantly looking for a reliable option under center, yet nothing seems to work. Be it bad drafting or questionable offseason moves, it is one of the more frustrating dilemmas that a team can face. One team that may never get off the ride is the Cleveland Browns, since the team threw out the only good quarterback they've had in 20 years in favor of Bill Cosby. But another team that was on the carousel for way too long was the Denver Broncos. For 4 years, they had one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time running their offense, taking the team to heights they hadn't seen in decades. Manning was a multi-time MVP, setting more records than I can count, and commanding arguably the greatest offense of all time in 2013. However, Father Time has been and will remain undefeated. Thanks to that and a litany of injuries, Manning's numbers would tank in 2015, and Denver would have to rely much more on their defense to get wins. But I guess you can afford to do that when you have an all-time great defense. This group would carry Manning all the way to Super Bowl 50, giving him a send-off that very few were blessed with. The Sheriff would officially retire in March of 2016, and while it was obvious that he was well past his expiration date, he still provided some security at the quarterback position. At best, he could show flashes of his MVP form, though at worst, he looked like the old racehorse that needed to be taken out back. In hindsight, Manning's retirement would be much more damning than Broncos fans initially expected. Following his exit, Denver would enter a seemingly never-ending period of mediocrity and misery at quarterback. The spirit of Peyton Manning would watch as the Broncos quarterback graveyard welcomed a new guest with every passing season. Only recently has Mile High been able to get through this curse, with a lone traveler from Oregon giving us all a reason to Bolieve. But in times of good fortune, we must also take time to remember the fallen. Consider this an obituary, as we observe the Denver Broncos quarterback graveyard. The first domino would fall just 2 days after Manning's retirement. While many believed that fifth-year backup Brock Osweiler would take the reins, he had other plans. Brock would instead sign with Houston, feeling like Bill O'Brien's offense would give him better opportunities to succeed. This forced Denver to pivot, which started with picking Memphis quarterback Paxton Lynch in the first round of the draft. He seemed promising, but he would have to wait for his time in the sun. In the meantime, the Broncos would rely on second-year backup Trevor Siemian. Like Osweiler, he had seen little to no action in his rookie season, but his performance in camp would help him land the starting spot. His performance during the season, though, it left a lot to be desired. Denver was winning, but it was primarily due to their defense and running game. This isn't to say that he was bad, though. There were a few games where he took full control of the offense, and overall, he finished the season with an 18-10 touchdown to interception ratio. The Broncos missed the playoffs via tiebreaker, but it didn't look like they were desperate for a quarterback just yet. They would take Garrett Bowles with their first-round pick in 2017, and it was clear that they still wanted to build around their young quarterbacks. But this would prove to be a foolish investment. Siemian would regress and begin dealing with shoulder injuries. After a 3-1 start, Denver would lose their next 6 games, forcing Vance Joseph to bring in Paxton Lynch. Unlike previous Broncos quarterbacks, Lynch did see some action in his rookie year, even starting a couple games while Siemian was hurt. He likely would have been the starter going into 2017, but an injury during the preseason kept him on the shelf. This was his spot to take. Siemian didn't look great, and not even bringing back Brock Osweiler could spark Denver's flaccid offense. Yeah, less than 2 years after signing that massive deal in Houston, Osweiler's stock had fallen so far that he found his way back in Mile High. Just wild stuff. But against the Raiders, Paxton Lynch had the chance to cement his place as the Broncos quarterback of the future. And I wish I could say he took full advantage of it. I really do. But he was very ineffective, only throwing for 41 yards and a pick. To add insult to injury, here's an injury. Lynch would only start one more game before being cut in 2018, cementing his status as a bust. He wouldn't be the only casualty, as Siemian and Osweiler were also shown the door following a miserable 5-11 campaign. It's at this time that I should talk about John Elway. For many, he needs no introduction. One of the best to ever do it. A Broncos legend that helped bring the team their first taste of championship glory. After years away from the team following his retirement, he would come back in 2011, being named the GM and VP of football operations. It's important to note that he had final say in all football matters, meaning that he did some good by bringing in guys like Peyton Manning and DeMarcus Ware, but he was also responsible for drafting, well, Paxton Lynch. With no long-term options at quarterback following the 2017 season, the upcoming offseason would be their most important in quite some time. They held the 5th pick in the draft and could use that to draft one of the many interesting quarterback prospects. Or there could even be tantalizing options at other positions of need. For most GMs, they would have to choose one or the other, but Elway chose the secret 3rd option. Instead of using their draft pick to get a young quarterback that they could develop, they instead chose to sign a career journeyman who was riding high off a Minneapolis miracle. Ladies and gentlemen, it's Case Keenum. Or Case Keenum if you ask Elway.
I'd like to introduce you to the new starting quarterback of the Denver Broncos, Case Keenum.
This would start the terrible streak of Broncos rental quarterbacks, and that 5th pick would be used on edge rusher Bradley Chubb. This move never made sense to me. The only reason I could see them not going after a quarterback in this draft was because it was so soon after Paxton Lynch flopped. They would rather just take an experienced option instead of using that great defense for a developmental project. But given how Keenum performed, they should have just went with one of the rookies. The biggest story to come out of that 2018 Broncos offense was undrafted running back Phillip Lindsay. That should also tell you all you need to know about Keenum. The best thing you could say about him was that he was better than Paxton Lynch, which isn't really saying much. After the first game, he went nearly a month without throwing a touchdown. There was no marginal improvement in this offense, showing that his 2017 campaign was nothing more than a fluke. And this guy was making $18 million a year. The Broncos did find themselves in a spot to possibly make the playoffs despite this, but a 4-game losing streak to end the year resulted in another lost season. You're telling me that a 31-year-old mediocre quarterback who had one good year of production sucked when he wasn't surrounded by a Pro Bowl roster? Shocking, I know! Elway must have had a good hit of that mile-high kush when he made that deal, but the buyers are more sank in after his high went away. So, another quarterback sent to that ever-growing graveyard, and Denver searches for its next answer. They probably wouldn't draft that go-to guy because they were picking near the middle, and they couldn't give Mr. Irrelevant a try due to him being too obsessed with Toy Story, meaning that Elway would have to make another big-brain move. He needed a proven winner, a champion, an elite quarterback. That man was none other than 34-year-old Joe Flacco, a guy who just got replaced by someone that Denver could have drafted, and he had beaten the Broncos in a heartbreaking fashion in the playoffs. But if you ask old Johnny Boy, he's still in his prime, which explains why they traded a 4th-round pick to get him. Denver's draft would be headlined by tight end Noah Fant, but they made another move that intrigued the fan base. In the 2nd round, they selected Missouri quarterback Drew Lock, who looked to have the makings of the next quality Broncos starter, but his time wouldn't come just yet. For now, it would be Joe Flacco's team, and my God, if you thought Keenum was bad, Flacco made that guy look like Aaron Rodgers. Nothing but checkdowns and screens to a very underwhelming receiving corps. Part of this could also be because of their OC, who had recently been the quarterback coach for the Niners. How they thought this guy would change this offense is a mystery to me. The Broncos with Joe Flacco were a crime against football. In his 8 starts, Denver was 2-6, and they only broke the 20-point mark once. Fans were clamoring for Drew Lock. Any change would be welcomed when you're living in a world of suck. In what could be seen as a mercy kill, Joe Flacco would suffer a season-ending injury in another losing effort against the Colts. In 8 games, this elite quarterback in his prime only managed to throw 6 touchdowns and 5 picks. So now should be the time for Lock, right? Well, a preseason thumb injury had kept him on IR for quite some time, meaning that the Broncos would have to look through the bargain bin. What they found was some guy named Brandon Allen. Their game against the Browns would not only be his first start, but his first snaps ever taken in an NFL game. But that didn't look to affect the 27-year-old, as the Broncos' offense looked better here than it ever did with Checkdown Man. And even though Denver choked against Minnesota the next week, Allen was still making good plays in key situations. But this magic wouldn't last any longer, as Allen only threw for 82 yards in a 20-3 loss in Buffalo. The Brandon Allen experiment reached its expiration date. Cool story, but we all knew he wasn't the long-term plan. That would be the next man behind center, Drew Lock. Finally taken off IR, he was given the starting job for the remainder of the season. Given that the Broncos were 3-8 at the time, he was playing with house money, and he didn't disappoint. Denver would go 4-1 in Lock's 5 starts, including a lopsided win against the Texans. Granted, most of Lock's touchdowns did come in that win, and he was only on pace to throw for around 20 touchdowns in a full year, but to Broncos fans, he looked like a godsend. He had confidence, potential, a weird Buzz Lightyear celebration, and he could rap. With continued development and the right personnel around him, Locke looked like the answer to Denver's quarterback problem. Since they didn't have to find a quarterback this time, the Broncos used their draft picks to add to what looked like a bright young core. Receivers Jerry Jeudy and KJ Hamler were taken in the first 2 rounds, along with some help on the offensive line in both the draft and free agency. Denver was seen by some as sort of a dark horse playoff team, but it all hinged on the development of Drew Lock. It's safe to say that 2020 was a year to forget for both Lock and the Broncos. To start, injuries kept him out for almost 4 games to start the year, which left Broncos fans with Jeff Driscoll and Brett Rippon as their starters for a month. At least Rippon beat the Jets, I guess. Lock would start all but 1 game throughout the remainder of the season, and he had certainly taken a step back. He wasn't connecting with the receivers, he turned the ball over way too much, and there was a lot of criticism toward his decision-making. At one point, he was statistically the worst starting quarterback in the NFL. We hardly saw any of what made him so interesting in his rookie campaign, and that 5-game stretch looked more like a fluke than a sign of what was to come. He finished the season with 16 touchdowns and 15 picks, and the Broncos only went 5-11, extending their playoff drought to 5 seasons. Now, I did mention that Locke started all but 1 of the remaining 12 games, and it wasn't because of an injury or performance issues. You see, 2020 was a very, trademark, unprecedented time. Businesses were closed, people were kept inside, everyone in the United States was at each other's throats, and the spread of coronavirus was seemingly never ending. Denver had already been dealing with the virus throughout the season, with many players contracting it or sitting out due to the risk. Their Week 5 game had to be rescheduled due to a massive outbreak in New England, but that would pale in comparison to their next dilemma. Just a day before their Week 12 game against the Saints, it was announced that every Broncos quarterback would be unable to play due to COVID exposure, and the NFL wouldn't allow them to reschedule the game, meaning that they would have to play with an emergency quarterback. This was the first time in 55 years that a team would have to go to this option. Their options were scarce. Initially, running back Royce Freeman looked like their guy. Then the Broncos tried to get one of their offensive QCs to suit up, but the NFL shut that down. Finally, they decided that practice squad wide receiver Kendall Hinton would start against the Saints, as he played quarterback in college before switching to receiver in his senior season. The game went about as well as one would expect. Hinton had more completions to the other team than his own, going 1 for 9 on the day with 2 picks. Denver only got on the board because of their defense. It was a shit show from beginning to end, but I wouldn't judge Hinton too much. He was thrown into the fire at the last minute, and their other available options wouldn't have fared much better. He does have a spot in Canton for this game though, so I guess he'll always have that. If the most notable thing about your season is a wide receiver playing quarterback for a game, you know your team is in the mud. It was so bad that Elway stepped aside, giving the reins to Vikings executive George Paton. It was clear that Elway needed to go. His assessment of quarterbacks was questionable at best, and his drafting, for the most part, brought in a whole lot of nothing. With Paton at the helm, the Broncos looked like they were undergoing another quarterback search. Locke didn't look like the guy, and Denver had the 9th pick in the upcoming draft. 2021 looked like another quarterback class filled with future stars. Given the teams that were picking ahead of them, the Broncos were going to be in a spot to get one of these guys. Even if they traded for Teddy Bridgewater the day before, the vision was still clear. Pick 9 comes around, and
the Denver Broncos select Pat Surtain, Jr., defensive back, Alabama.
Heartbreak. You're telling me that Justin Fields and Mac Jones were available, and we take a defensive back? Is he going to throw the ball too? We're going to run it with Teddy? Unbelievable that we missed out on a future MVP for this Surtain guy. I bet he doesn't even last 3 years. So, Teddy Bridgewater gets to join the mile-high QB carousel. He did help the Broncos get off to a hot start, but I think anyone could have gone 3-0 with that schedule. His play was nothing to write home about, showing flashes of greatness but never being able to maintain it. The true Teddy Bridgewater experience. Teddy, like the team itself, was just spinning on the hamster wheel of mediocrity. Denver did once again have an outside shot at the playoffs with a 7-6 record, but the loss of Bridgewater against the Bengals all but ended those hopes. Now it was once again Drew Lock time, which brought about more predictable pain behind center. Once more, the Broncos were on the outside looking in, finishing the season with a 7-10 record. Things needed to change, drastically. Vic Fangio was whacked. They needed a new offensive guru, someone who was going to revive this flaccid offense, someone who knew Aaron Rodgers. Yeah, that's the main reason that I believe they brought in Nathaniel Hackett. The Broncos have been tied to Aaron Rodgers for a while now, so bringing in his former OC would hopefully convince him to take his talents to mile high. All great, until Rodgers signed an extension. Cucked again. What to do now? Were they really going to run it with Drew Lock or Teddy again? No. This time, George Paton had a backup plan. No longer would they have to rely on failed prospects or rental quarterbacks. Drew and Teddy, you can pack your bags because we've got a real quarterback now. The same day Rodgers signed that extension, the Broncos traded for Russell Wilson. Finally, the Broncos got another star quarterback. All it cost was 2 firsts, 2 seconds, a 5th, and Noah Fant, but it didn't matter. They got their guy. Those picks wouldn't matter when they're hoisting the Lombardi, baby. Hope was at an all-time high in Denver. It was said for years that this team was just a quarterback away from competing, and now Russ would lead Broncos country to glory once again. Sure, he was part of a historic Super Bowl ass-kicking, and he had a down 2021, but don't you let that get in the way of the hype. This season would kick off in dramatic fashion, with Russ facing his old team on Monday Night Football. This would be the first step towards our ultimate championship goal. Broncos country, let's ride!
McManus missed it.
Nope. Oh well, first game jitters, I guess. Surely the offense will get better, right? God, no. This offense was historically bad, only staying in games because they had a top-tier defense. Injuries plagued the roster, and one thing was clear. The offensive talent of this team was greatly exaggerated. The receiving room wasn't as deep. There were no competent running backs besides Javonte Williams, and the offensive line couldn't block a soul. Maybe you should have reconsidered letting Mike Munchak walk, George. And then there's the man of the hour. Mr. Unlimited. Chef Russ wasn't just cooked, this dude was burnt to a crisp. He held the ball for way too long, trying to make plays like he did when he was 5 years younger. He couldn't throw to the middle of the field, and many games were lost due to back-breaking turnovers. There was a time when he had more bathrooms in his house than touchdown passes. Combine this with the Danger Witch memes and stories about high knees on a team plane, and what you get is an absolute joke of a quarterback. The guy was generational levels of corny, trying to plug that dumb catchphrase even though the team is spiraling.
Thank you guys. Broncos country.
Did I mention that they signed him to a 5-year extension before he even played? And the Seahawks made the playoffs while having Denver's first-round pick? A 5-12 season was their reward for going all in. This season also saw another head coaching search, after the team fired Nathaniel Hackett following a Christmas Day massacre. This time, they didn't base their coaching search on if someone knew Aaron Rodgers. Instead, it was based on whether someone could waste a long Super Bowl window, which Sean Payton fit perfectly. All it cost was another first-round pick. Thankfully, this one belonged to Miami. It was hoped that Payton could bring even more out of Russ in the offense, like he did with Drew Brees in New Orleans. Even though Drew Brees was already a winning starter before Payton, and Russ was showing irreversible signs of decline, with the nightmarish year that he just had, things could only go up for Russ. Were things better in 2023? Technically, yes. He threw more touchdowns and was willing to unleash the moonball more, but he was still making the same mistakes that made him unwatchable the previous year. Turnovers at the worst times and the inability to just throw the ball away got the Broncos in a 1-5 hole to start the year. But, seemingly out of nowhere, the Broncos started winning again. It was really weird because the offense still wasn't good, but they were doing just enough to win. Hell, they even beat the Chiefs, which hadn't been done in 8 years. That just shows you how depressing it was to be a Broncos fan at this time. At 6-5, hopes were high that Denver could end their 7-year playoff drought, but like we've seen before, they couldn't take advantage of this. Russ reverted back to the status quo, and their playoff dreams were shattered after losing to the lowly Patriots on Christmas Eve. Chef Russ's time in Denver would end on rather ugly terms. Wilson was benched following the loss in New England. He later alleged that after they beat the Chiefs, he was approached by the team to change his contract so they wouldn't have to pay him $37 million in 2025 if he couldn't pass a physical. If he refused, he would be benched. Understandably, Wilson declined. This caused a media circus to form in Broncos country. The 8-9 season was now an afterthought. The new goal was resolving this situation, and the easiest solution was just sending Russ away to the glue factory, making him the 12th Broncos quarterback to be cast aside since Manning's retirement. With no quarterback and $39 million in dead cap, the Broncos finally decided that they needed to move away from the rental quarterback model. They needed to use their high draft pick to select a quarterback and hope that Sean Payton could mold him into their franchise savior. On April 25th, 2024, they got their guy.
The Denver Broncos select Bo Nix.
There it is.
Quarterback, Oregon.
Bo Nix. The longtime Oregon quarterback would now carry the hopes and dreams of Broncos country. There was some skepticism about how his talents would translate to the professional level. I've been on record saying that I didn't feel great about the pick at the time, and his rocky start seemed to prove those concerns right. But throughout the year, Nix settled down and had a damn good rookie campaign. Along with a stellar defense, Nix helped lead the Broncos to their first playoff appearance in nearly a decade. He's been able to carry this momentum into his sophomore season, albeit with some ugly games every now and then. Nix isn't perfect. There are flaws to his game, primarily when it comes to his arm punts or throwing without properly setting his feet, but he still provides something that Broncos fans haven't seen in quite some time at the quarterback position: stability. Unlike Drew Lock or Paxton Lynch, Bo didn't immediately crumble when he struggled. His ability to bounce back when times are tough is enough to keep the group together and stave off any notions of a quarterback dilemma. It seems, as of now, that the ghost of Peyton Manning can finally rest. No longer must we sacrifice any more poor souls to that dreaded quarterback carousel. While it was a long road to get here, we can say that their sacrifices were not in vain. Hope is renewed for an era of winning football in Mile High. Perhaps they can overtake the evil Chiefs empire and finally close the gate to the Denver Broncos quarterback graveyard. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch y'all later.